A naval convoy was seconds from destruction, enemy gunboats closing fast. Through a storm, radio screaming, "We won't survive 5 minutes! Reinforcements? Hours away! Air support? Grounded!" The entire base braced for disaster until one quiet woman at the docks lifted a dented pair of binoculars. To everyone else, she was just a supply clerk, mocked daily by Sergeant Wolfe. Binoculars at the pier, spotting seagulls? But when he grabbed them, his smirk collapsed. Scratched into the frame were words whispered only in sniper folklore. 2,985 meters. Spotter. Kill confirmed. Who was she really? And how could a clerk with battered optics change the fate of ships at sea? Before we reveal how those binoculars turned into the deadliest weapon on the waterfront, smash subscribe and drop your city in the comments for a simple woman, because this story will leave you stunned. Waves slammed against the steel hulls moored along the naval pier, salt spray misting through the floodlights that painted the cargo yard in stark whites and shadows. The night shift was winding down, forklifts hissing as they carted ammunition crates from ship to shore, chains rattling against towering stacks of containers. Somewhere beyond the breakwater, thunder rolled, heavy and low, as though the ocean itself was warning of the storm to come. Amid the chaos, Claire Donovan walked with measured steps, clipboard tucked under one arm, the battered binoculars bouncing lightly against her chest with every stride. To the men around her, she was just another logistics clerk in grease-stained fatigues. To Claire, the weight of those optics was both anchor and ghost, dragging the past into every waking moment. Sergeant Wolfe leaned against a crate of naval shells, his coffee steaming in the cold salt air. He had made a habit of watching Claire, not with admiration, but with the kind of curiosity that curdles into mockery. 15 years in uniform had taught him the rhythms of military life, and this woman disrupted them. She didn't chat, she didn't laugh. She moved with the precision of a metronome, and always carried those binoculars. Tonight, under the harsh floodlights, Wolfe couldn't resist. He pushed away from the crate, his boots clanging on the steel deck plates as he called out, "Hey Donovan, spot anything good out there? Seagulls fighting over trash?" A ripple of chuckles spread across the pier crew. Private Ethan Cross, barely out of Ohio and hungry for approval, smirked. "Maybe she's bird-watching, Sarge. Not much else to see on a dock." Claire didn't answer. She never did. She logged serial numbers, checked seals, and signed off on manifests with a discipline that bordered on clinical. But Wolfe wasn't letting it go. He closed the distance, his voice carrying over the clang of rigging. "Come on, Donovan. What's the deal with those things? You wear them like jewelry." She kept working, jaw tightening just enough for him to notice. The laughter behind him grew louder. That was the fuel. He reached forward, quick and careless, and lifted the strap from her neck before she could stop him. The binoculars were heavier than he expected, the metal pitted with scars of hard use. He raised them theatrically, peering across the yard. "Well, look at that, crystal clear. You can even see Jenkins slacking off by the crane." More laughter, but then his fingers brushed something etched into the frame beneath the right eyepiece. At first he thought it was damage, just another scratch. He tilted under the light. Letters and numbers emerged, worn smooth by years of handling, yet still precise. 2,985 meters, spotter kill confirmed. Wolfe's smirk collapsed. The weight in his hands doubled, as though the binoculars themselves demanded reverence. His breath caught. He had heard that number before, late at night in mess hall rumors, stories traded like contraband. Nearly 3 kilometers, the kind of distance that separated myths from mortals. The pier noise dulled in his ears. He lowered the optics slowly, eyes locking onto Claire's. She was watching him without flinching, her grey stare cold and steady, like the horizon before a storm. Around them, the laughter tapered into confusion. "What is it, Sarge?" Ethan asked, glancing between them. Wolfe didn't answer. He couldn't. He felt the ground shift beneath him. Not the pier, but his certainty. He handed the binoculars back with uncharacteristic care. Claire slipped the strap over her neck, the familiar weight settling against her chest. She returned to her clipboard as though nothing had happened. The floodlights flickered as the wind picked up, the sea slamming harder against the breakwater. Somewhere out in the black water, a convoy reported in through garbled radio static. The words barely carried through the interference, but Wolfe heard enough to stiffen. Enemy contact, gunboats, requesting immediate support. His gaze slid back to Claire, who was still writing, calm as ever, the battered optics resting against her collarbone. For the first time since he had started mocking her, Wolfe wasn't sure who she really was. And deep inside, a question gnawed at him. Could those binoculars and the woman who carried them mean the difference between disaster and survival? The storm pressed closer, thunder shaking the air above the pier. Orders barked over loudspeakers, sailors scrambling to secure cargo. The convoy's pleas crackled again, urgent, desperate. Wolfe felt his chest tighten. Minutes ago, mocking Claire had been entertainment. Now, staring at her unshaken composure, it felt like he had been laughing at a fuse already lit. And the explosion was coming. The storm raged harder through the night, cables snapping taut as ships strained against their moorings. Claire finished her checks, her expression as unreadable as the dark water, while Sergeant Wolfe stood rooted by the pier rail, still shaken by the etching he had seen. The words burned in his mind. 2,985 meters, spotter, kill confirmed, and no matter how he tried to dismiss them as a trick, he couldn't. He knew what it meant. He had heard whispers about that shot, traded in mess halls from Iraq to Afghanistan. They called it impossible, a kill at a distance so far bullets were ghosts before they struck. If Claire Donovan had been there, if she had been the one holding the glass that spotted the target, then she wasn't a clerk at all. She was something else, something Wolfe couldn't put back into the box he had opened. He found her later in the dim glow of the maintenance shack, sipping lukewarm coffee while the rain hammered the metal roof. For the first time, Wolfe sat across from her without smirk or swagger. He set his cup down and leaned in. "That mark on your binoculars. That wasn't a joke, was it?" Claire didn't answer at first. She just traced the rim of her cup with one finger, her eyes unfocused, as if looking through miles of desert air instead of corrugated steel. Finally, she said, "It was my third deployment, Coral Valley, Afghanistan, 2022. Her voice was low, clipped, carrying no pride, only weight. Wolfe swallowed hard. He knew that valley, at least by reputation. Convoys bled there, ambushed in the gullies, torn apart before air support could arrive. Claire continued, each word like a stone placed carefully. "Our team was on overwatch. We saw them hit a convoy with an IED. Survivors scattered, pinned down. Their leader was directing the attack. I tracked him through my glass, 20 minutes, watching the way he moved, the way he controlled the fight. At that range, the sniper couldn't see him clean. The angle was wrong. So I called the adjustments. Every shift of wind, every degree of elevation. 4.5 seconds after he pulled the trigger, the round hit home. The convoy lived." She stopped, staring into her coffee. Wolfe imagined it, the endless wait, the math, the patience, the burden of knowing lives depended on a voice whispering numbers through the static. He whispered, almost to himself, "That was you." Before Claire could answer, the shack door swung open. Captain Marcus Hale stepped in, water dripping off his slicker, his square jaws set tight. A veteran of ports and politics, Hale ran the dock like a fiefdom. His eyes swept the room and landed on Claire, lingering just long enough to curdle the air. "Sergeant Wolfe," Hale said, his tone sharp. "What are you doing cozying up with a clerk when we've got a convoy screaming for help?" Wolfe stiffened. "Sir, Donovan might—" Hale cut him off with a hand. "I know who she is. And I know enough to say she's not your solution." His gaze locked on Claire now, colder than the storm. "You had your chance in the field. You were reclassified for a reason. Don't start dredging up myths to make yourself useful again." The words sliced deeper than any mockery Wolfe had ever used. Claire's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't lash back. She had heard this before. In medical briefings, in reassignments stamped with red ink, in the polite dismissal of officers who saw her as broken glass. Hale took a step closer, lowering his voice but not his contempt. "The dock is no place for ghosts. We run logistics, not legends. You keep your head down, process your shipments, and leave the fighting to those still cleared for it." Wolfe bristled. "Sir, with respect, you didn't see—" Hale turned on him, eyes like iron. "What you saw was a story carved into scrap metal. Stories don't win battles. Men with orders do." The rain drummed harder, filling the silence that followed. Claire set down her cup, her voice calm but threaded with steel. Men with orders didn't save that convoy in Coral Valley. Hale's jaw tightened. For a moment, Wolfe thought the captain might explode, but instead, Hale leaned back, voice dropping to a hiss. "You think carrying around those binoculars makes you indispensable? It makes you reckless. It makes the young ones think you're something to look up to. You're not. You're a reminder of failure." The word landed like a blow. Ethan Cross had drifted in behind Hale, soaked and wide-eyed, catching every word. His smirk from earlier was gone, replaced by unease. He looked at Claire differently now, not with mockery, but with the confusion of a man realizing the ground beneath him might be more complicated than he thought. Hale finally straightened, snapping his slicker tight. "There's a storm and a convoy in trouble. Leave the problem-solving to command. That's an order." He left without waiting for a reply, boots splashing into the rain. Ethan lingered a second, then ducked out, head down. Wolfe sat in the silence, the air heavy with things unsaid. He looked at Claire. She stared back, her face calm, but her eyes carrying the storm Hale had tried to unleash. Wolfe spoke quietly. "He's wrong. You're not a failure." Claire lifted the binoculars from her chest, running her thumb across the etching. "He's not entirely wrong, either. Marcus is gone. I walked away with shrapnel in my leg and ghosts in my head. And now—" She let the words trail off, her eyes distant again. Wolfe wanted to push, to demand more, but he saw the wall she had built. Not for him, for herself. The convoy's radio chatter spiked again across the loudspeakers outside, urgent and raw. Wolfe rose, chest tight. Hale had drawn his lines, but Wolfe couldn't ignore what he had seen in Claire's eyes when she told her story. Not pride, not bravado, just the quiet knowledge of someone who had carried life and death on her shoulders and survived. Outside, the storm hammered the pier, and beyond it, sailors bled in the dark. Wolfe realized then that Hale's orders wouldn't be enough. Something else was coming, something only Claire could decide. And when it did, they would all find out whether the mark etched into battered steel was just a story or a warning. Rain lashed the pier in relentless sheets, the wind driving spray across the stacked containers until the whole dockyard seemed to shimmer with salt and steel. Then the loudspeakers blared again, jagged with static. Convoy Delta, under heavy fire, multiple enemy gunboats closing in. We need immediate support. Repeat, immediate support. The voice cracked into silence, swallowed by thunder, but the urgency was unmistakable. Men froze where they stood. Forklifts ground to a halt. Cranes creaked mid-lift, and every sailor on the dock turned instinctively toward the sea. Out there, in the storm-churned black, brothers in arms were trapped. Sergeant Gareth Wolfe's stomach dropped. He looked to Claire Donovan without meaning to, and found her already staring. Into the storm, binoculars lifted, though the rain turned the horizon to blur. She lowered them slowly, rain dripping from the battered frame, and said, "Steady and certain, they're pinned against the East Channel shoals. They won't last." Her voice cut through the gale like a blade. There was no hesitation, no guesswork. She had seen this pattern before. Captain Marcus Hale marched onto the platform, rain beading on his slicker, fury in his eyes. "Lock down the yard," he barked. "Secure the ammo sheds, chain the cranes, no one leaves this dock." His words collided with another blast of static hull breach, casualties mounting. "We can't maneuver." The sound of desperation hung in the air like smoke. Wolfe's fists clenched. He stepped toward Hale. "Sir, they're dying out there." "We can't just—" Hale cut him off, voice like iron. "We wait for reinforcements. Air's grounded. Patrol boats are hours out. You know the rules, Sergeant. We do not gamble lives on fantasies." Claire stepped forward, rain plastering her hair against her face, her grey eyes hard. "You don't have to gamble. You have the observation tower. From there I can track every gunboat, call their movements, direct counterfire. I've done it before. I can do it again." For a moment the storm seemed to pause. The tower loomed above the pier, radar dishes sweeping across the horizon, its windows glowing faintly in the dark. It was the only vantage point high enough to see the channel clearly. Hale rounded on her, disgust in every line of his face. "Absolutely not. You're a clerk, Donovan. Reclassified. Grounded. That means out of combat. You process crates and you stay out of the way. You don't get to play soldier just because you can recite war stories." Her jaw tightened, but her voice remained calm, deadly calm. "If you wait for protocol, they'll all be dead before sunrise. Every minute counts. Give me a radio and access to the tower, that's all I need." The conviction in her words sent a shiver down Wolfe's spine. She wasn't pleading, she was stating fact. Hale's voice dropped low, sharp as broken glass. "You think carrying those binoculars makes you useful? It makes you dangerous. You'll mislead men, get them killed chasing ghosts. And I won't have blood on my dock because a relic of the past can't let go." He stabbed a finger toward Wolfe. "Back me on this, Sergeant. Reinforcements will arrive. We wait. That's an order." The radio cracked again, more desperate than before. "We're surrounded, taking fire from both flanks. If help doesn't come now, we're finished." Wolfe's chest tightened. He turned, meeting Claire's eyes. They were unflinching, stormlight reflected in grey steel. No fear, no plea, just certainty. In that stare, Wolfe saw the etching on the binoculars, saw the stories whispered over, midnight rations, saw the convoy bleeding in the dark water, and knew the truth. This wasn't a myth. This was their only chance. He drew a breath, feeling the weight of every watching gaze, every unspoken judgment. "Sir," he said, voice steady, "with respect, I'm not waiting." Hale's eyes widened, fury flashing, but Wolfe didn't stop. "I'll take responsibility, but if we stand here and do nothing, those sailors die, and their blood is on us." He turned to Claire, rain streaming down his face. "Let's go. Tower access now." For the first time she moved, adjusting the strap across her chest. Claire gave a single nod, then strode toward the stairwell that spiraled up the tower. Wolfe followed, boots pounding against the slick concrete, the roar of the storm swallowing Hale's furious shouts behind them. The decision had been made. Lightning forked over the horizon as Claire Donovan climbed the tower steps. The wind clawing at her fatigues, salt spray carried high into the night. Sergeant Gareth Wolfe followed close behind, each step slick with rain, his pulse hammering harder than the storm. The higher they climbed, the more the dock shrank beneath them into a blur of containers and cranes, and the more the ocean stretched vast and black. At the top, the door slammed open against the gust, revealing the radar room glowing with green sweeps and red blips. A single radio operator sat hunched over his console, headphones pressed to his ears, his face pale. It was Private Ethan Cross. He looked up, startled to see Wolfe and Claire dripping in the doorway. "What's going on?" "Command said hold position." "Not anymore." Wolfe cut him off. He shoved the door shut behind them, bracing it against the wind. Claire was already moving, striding to the broad windows that faced the sea. She wiped a sleeve across the glass and raised her binoculars. Through the storm and darkness, the channel was faintly visible, jagged with whitecaps and shadowed by cliffs. Far out, faint muzzle flashes flickered. The convoy. Ethan gaped. "You can't actually see anything in this weather." Claire didn't answer. She adjusted the focus, slow and methodical, her breath steady. Then she spoke into the room with crisp precision. "Convoy is in a defensive box. 4 ships, 2 are smoking. Enemy boats are pressing from the North Ridge, using the shoals as cover. They're pinning the convoy against the rocks." Ethan blinked at her, then at Wolfe. "How the hell can she tell?" "Shut up and get that commander on the net," Wolfe snapped. Ethan hesitated, then obeyed, fumbling with the dials until the radio hissed alive. A strained voice burst through, broken by static. "This is Convoy Delta, multiple wounded. Enemy fire intensifying. Need eyes, need guidance." Wolfe grabbed the handset. "Delta, this is Pier Tower. We've got you. Stand by for overwatch." He handed the set to Claire. She didn't hesitate. Her tone shifted into something new, firm, clipped, a professional cadence that carried authority. "Convoy Delta, this is Tower. I have eyes on your position. Enemy vessels, 5 confirmed, North Shoals closing in. Adjust bearing 10 degrees south. Keep engines staggered to mask prop signatures. Copy?" The commander's reply was instant. "Copy, adjusting bearing." Ethan's jaw hung open. He looked out into the storm, then back at her. She's actually calling their moves." Claire didn't look away from her glass. "Cross, you'll relay grid coordinates. Keep the line open. Sergeant Wolfe, track radar blips against my visuals. We don't miss anything." For the next minutes, the room became a war zone of its own. Claire called positions, her voice cutting through static like a scalpel. 2. Contacts moving south ridge, bearing 085, speed 15 knots. They're circling to flank. Convoy, shift starboard gunners, angle high on the swell. Muzzle flashes winked from the convoy, and moments later, return fire from the ridge boats faltered. But then the radio sputtered, the signal shredding into static. Ethan yanked at the dials. "Storm's jamming us, I'm losing them." Claire lowered her binoculars just long enough to speak, calm but urgent. "Find a clean channel. They don't have minutes to wait." Wolfe swore under his breath. "Cross, switch to the reserve frequency. Now." Ethan's hands shook, but he spun the knobs, sweat beading under his headset despite the cold. Finally, the static broke into a faint voice. "Taking fire port side. Casualties. Where's our cover?" Claire snapped back in. "Convoy Delta. Enemy fast boat, closing port side. Low profile. Aiming to breach. Machine guns, grid 4372. Suppress now." The answer came in gunfire over the radio. Then, a cheer. "Contact destroyed. Breach attempt stopped." Ethan ripped off his headset, staring at her. How the hell did you see that?" "I couldn't even pick it up on radar." Claire didn't lower her binoculars. "I've been watching the water. The swell hides them, but their wakes don't lie." Wolfe felt a chill. It wasn't luck. It wasn't guesswork. She read the sea like scripture. But the storm wasn't done. The radio shrieked as another wave of interference hit, drowning Claire's commands mid-sentence. For agonizing seconds, they lost contact. Out the window, Wolfe saw faint blossoms of fire, convoy ships taking hits. His gut twisted. Claire's knuckles whitened on the binoculars. They're regrouping North Ridge. 20 men at least. They're staging a mass push. She turned to Wolfe. "If we don't break it now, the convoy is finished." The radio hissed dead. Ethan's voice cracked. "I can't hold the signal." "It's the storm. It's killing every band." Wolfe slammed a fist on the console. "There's got to be a backup." Claire turned sharply. "Direct line. Use the base-to-base military frequency. It's not authorized for field units, but it'll cut through interference." Ethan blanched. "That's command only if Hale finds out." Wolfe cut him off, eyes hard. "Then he finds out." "Do it." Ethan hesitated, then obeyed, fingers trembling as he patched the frequency. The radio cleared like a curtain ripped open. Claire's voice shot through instantly. Convoy Delta, enemy massing North Ridge, grid 4789. They will push in 60 seconds. Prepare crossfire at bearing 090 and 120. Do not break formation. On the horizon, fire bloomed as enemy boats surged forward, their wakes slicing white through the Black Sea. Claire's cadence quickened, crisp and unshaken. Gunboat entering from shadow, grid 4810, mark and fire. Second contact trailing, slower, vulnerable aft. Hit it now. The convoy's return fire lit the channel like lightning, tearing into the dark. One gunboat erupted in flame, another broke formation, scattering the assault. Ethan sat frozen, headset pressed to his ears, listening as the impossible unfolded. The convoy was holding. They were holding because of her. The battle stretched on, each minute heavier than the last. Claire never faltered. Even as the storm howled, even as static chewed at her words, she kept her eyes fixed, reading the ocean with inhuman clarity. Her voice was the only steady thing in the chaos. Shift starboard, cover your wounded, South Ridge clear, focus all fire north. You have them on the run. Then, at last, the call came through. Tower, this is Convoy Delta. Enemy disengaging, casualties stable. We're still afloat. You saved us. Claire finally lowered her binoculars. Her face was pale, her hair plastered, but her eyes burned bright. She exhaled slowly, the weight of command slipping away, replaced by something else. A quiet satisfaction, a reminder of what she had once been, and still was. Wolfe looked at her in awe. He had mocked her for months, reduced her to a joke on the dock. But tonight he had seen the truth. She wasn't broken. She wasn't a ghost. She was a weapon sharpened by time, a set of eyes that could turn the tide of war. Ethan, still stunned, removed his headset. His voice was hoarse. She really did it. She saved them. He looked at Claire differently now. No trace of mockery, only reverence. I didn't believe it. Not until I saw it myself. Claire wiped condensation from her lenses and settled the binoculars back around her neck. Outside, the storm still raged, but the channel beyond was quiet. The convoy had survived. And for the first time since her reclassification, Claire felt the weight of the binoculars not as a burden, but as a purpose returned. The storm eased toward dawn, leaving the docks glittering under floodlights and a thin drizzle. The frantic energy of battle had drained into weary silence. Cranes stood motionless, ships groaned against their lines, and sailors moved in small groups, whispering about what they had just witnessed. In the observation tower, the air still smelled of ozone and burned circuits from the overworked radio. Claire Donovan lowered her binoculars at last, her shoulders slumping with exhaustion. For hours, she had been a pillar of steel, but now the weight of adrenaline left her pale and trembling. Sergeant Wolfe stood at her side, chest heaving as though he had fought the fight himself. Below them, word spread quickly. The convoy had survived. Against all odds, 4 battered ships had limped back towards safety, guided by a woman no one thought mattered. Sailors who had laughed at her now looked up at the tower windows as though they belonged to a shrine. When Claire and Wolfe descended the spiraling stairwell, Private Ethan Cross was waiting at the base. His helmet was pushed back, his face pale but his eyes wide with something between shame and awe. For a moment he fumbled with words, then finally blurted, "I'm sorry." The stormy night seemed to swallow his voice, but Claire heard it. She looked at him steadily. Ethan swallowed, his hands twisting nervously. "I thought you were a joke. All of us did. Seagulls, remember? But you saved them. You saved me from being the kind of man who mocks someone better than him." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry for every word." Claire didn't speak right away. Instead, she adjusted the binoculars against her chest, the strap creaking faintly, and then gave him a small nod. It was enough. Ethan dropped his gaze, relief and guilt washing over his face. The crowd parted as Captain Marcus Hale strode across the slick pier, coat snapping in the wind. His expression was carved from stone, but his jaw was tight, his eyes flickering, with something he couldn't mask. Anger, yes, but also the sting of being wrong. Every sailor on the dock turned to watch, waiting for his response. Hale stopped before Claire, his boots splashing in shallow puddles. For a long moment he said nothing, the silence stretching. Then, through clenched teeth, he muttered. The convoy returned. Alive. He paused, his gaze boring into her, but she refused to look away. At last he turned sharply, addressing the assembled crew instead. Return to stations, secure the yard. His voice carried no conviction. And then he walked away, shoulders stiff, the stormlight glinting off his wet coat. The silence left behind was louder than his words. The men looked to Wolfe. He stepped forward, his voice rough but clear, resonating against the containers and steel decks. You all saw what she did tonight. You heard the calls. Without her, Convoy Delta would be at the bottom of the channel. He turned to Claire, his face stripped of the mockery he had worn for months. You're not a clerk. You're not a broken soldier, not someone to be laughed at. His voice hardened with conviction. You're a soldier, one of the best I've ever stood beside. A ripple went through the crowd. No one laughed, no one scoffed. For once, every man present saw Claire not as an odd shadow haunting the docks, but as what she truly was, a survivor, a professional, a weapon of unmatched skill. The respect in their eyes was awkward at first, new and untested, but it was real. Claire's throat tightened. She had carried the binoculars as a weight, a memory of what she had lost. Tonight, they had become something else. She adjusted them with steady hands, then met Wolfe's eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded once, the lines of command between them shifting into something deeper. Recognition, respect. As dawn pushed pale light over the horizon, sailors moved quietly, their conversations carrying a new tone. No more jokes about seagulls. No more smirks when she walked past. When Claire crossed the dock, men straightened instinctively, some even saluting without thinking. It was subtle but undeniable. She had been rewritten in their minds. High above, the storm clouds broke, a single shaft of sunlight spilling onto the water where the convoy limped home. Claire stood at the edge of the pier, Wolfe and Ethan beside her, the sea breeze tugging at her fatigues. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like an exile trapped in paperwork. She felt like a soldier again, and this time, no one dared to deny it. Weeks passed, and the storm that had nearly swallowed Convoy Delta became a story retold in every mess hall along the coast. Sailors spoke of muzzle flashes through rain, of enemy gunboats that seemed unstoppable, and of a woman in the tower who turned the tide with nothing more than her eyes and a battered set of optics. For once, Claire Donovan didn't shy away from the whispers. She walked the docks with her usual quiet discipline, but when crews nodded in respect or young recruits asked if the rumors were true, she no longer felt the sting of mockery. She simply answered with silence, and that silence carried more weight than any boast. One grey morning, Sergeant Wolfe found her sorting manifests beside a wall of containers. He carried a sealed envelope, his expression uncharacteristically careful. "Orders," he said simply, handing it over. Claire slit the envelope open with a practiced flick of her knife and read. The words surprised her, though her face remained steady. She had been reassigned, not back to the field, but to the training division. Her new title, Instructor, Long-Range Observation. She stared at the page for a long moment, then folded it and tucked it into her breast pocket. "They want me to teach," she murmured. Wolfe nodded. "They saw what you did. Now they want a generation of sailors to see the sea the way you do." Claire began the role within a week. In a converted hangar overlooking the pier, she stood before rows of young recruits clutching standard-issue binoculars. At first, the cadets shuffled uneasily, not sure what to expect from a woman they'd heard was half myth, half rumor. But the moment she lifted her own battered optics, the room stilled. Her voice was measured, patient, but filled with authority. She spoke of wakes hidden in swells, of shadows that betrayed boats before radar could. She drilled them on wind, tide, and the subtle language of the sea. Under her instruction, raw recruits learned to read the ocean as though it were a living map. Even Private Ethan Cross joined her class at his own request. On the first day, he lingered at the back, sheepish. Claire noticed but said nothing. Over time, he became one of her most attentive students, driven less by guilt now and more by genuine respect. Watching him scribble notes furiously, she allowed herself the faintest smile. By the end of the first course cycle, word of her effectiveness had spread beyond the base. Convoys reported fewer surprises, crews spotted ambushes earlier, and morale surged. At the graduation ceremony, Wolfe watched as the recruits stood tall, their optics gleaming in the sun, while Claire addressed them with quiet pride. "Eyes save lives," she told them. "If you see the enemy before they see you, you've already won half the battle." The applause was genuine, thunderous, but later that evening, as Claire walked the pier alone, the sea stretching endless, and dark before her, a shadow approached from the gangway of a visiting frigate. A man in civilian clothes, but with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, stopped in front of her. His eyes were sharp, his voice smooth but edged with purpose. "Special Operations Command," he introduced himself quietly. "International Liaison." He didn't offer a name, only credentials she didn't bother to inspect. She recognized the weight of authority when she saw it. "We've been following your work," he continued. "Not just what happened in the tower, your past deployments. Coral Valley." Her chest tightened at the mention, but she didn't look away. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so the waves nearly drowned it. "Radar can be jammed, satellites blinded, but a human who can read the battlefield with intuition, that can't be replaced. We're assembling a task force for operations where traditional surveillance fails. We need someone to train our teams, and occasionally to stand beside them when the stakes are highest." Claire studied him, the sea breeze tugging at her hair. For years she had believed her war was over, that she was condemned to shuffle papers and haunt the edges of usefulness. Even when she had saved Convoy Delta, she thought it was a singular moment, a flare before fading again. Yet here was proof that the world still needed her eyes. "Why me?" she asked softly. The man's reply was simple: "Because you saw 3 kilometers into a storm and changed the outcome. And because no one else alive has that mark carved into their glass." Her hand instinctively touched the binoculars at her chest, the etching pressed cold against her palm. For a long moment she said nothing, then gave a single nod. When he left, disappearing back toward the frigate, Wolfe emerged from the shadows where he had been watching. "You're not just an instructor anymore, are you?" he asked. Claire turned to him, her expression calm but her eyes alive with something new, a spark she hadn't felt in years. "No," she admitted. "This was only the beginning." The waves broke against the pier as dawn painted the horizon in silver. Claire stood tall, binoculars catching the first light, a soldier reborn not by title but by purpose. What came next was bigger than the dock, bigger than Convoy Delta. The world beyond the horizon was waiting, and she was ready to see it. And that's the story of how a woman mocked for carrying binoculars at a naval pier became the one voice that saved an entire convoy and found her way back to purpose. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. If this story moved you, please hit the subscribe button to support a Simple Woman and never miss the next tale of courage and resilience. Drop a comment below. Would you have trusted Claire with the tower or followed Captain Hale's orders? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And tell us where you're watching from. Our community stretches across the world, and your voice matters here. Until next time, stay strong, stay inspired, and remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the sharpest eyes.